Before glass cases and velvet ropes, before security cameras and museum maps, statues didn't sit in galleries, they watched. They stood in doorways, crossroads, thresholds, burial mounds, and forgotten courtyards, placed there not to be admired, but to keep things out, or keep things in. Tonight, we walk quietly into that world, a world where statues weren't art. They were guardians, sentinels, warnings carved in stone. Not all of them were dangerous, but many were unsettling. And some statues were so feared, so loaded with stories, that people would avert their eyes rather than risk catching their gaze. Let us begin. Imagine an old medieval village tucked into a forest clearing. At its entrance stands a carved figure. Not a saint, not a knight, just a shape. A face weathered by rain, one eye worn smooth by wind. Locals call it the gatekeeper. Children are told never to touch it. Travelers are told never to stare at it too long. And elders, when pressed, simply shrug and say, "It watches for what we can't." No one knows who carved it. No one remembers when it appeared, but it has always stood there, hands folded as if holding an invisible secret. At night, villagers claim it keeps the wolves away. Others say it keeps the dead in their graves. Whatever the truth is, every morning someone leaves a small offering, a coin, a flower, a handful of grain, not for worship, but for courtesy, as if you're thanking a guard you'd rather not meet at his post. Imagine an old medieval village tucked into a forest clearing. At its entrance stands a carved figure. Not a saint, not a knight, just a shape. A face weathered by rain, one eye worn smooth by wind. Locals call it the gatekeeper. Children are told never to touch it. Travelers are told never to stare at it too long. And elders, when pressed, simply shrug and say, "It watches for what we can't." No one knows who carved it. No one remembers when it appeared. But it has always stood there, hands folded, as if holding an invisible secret. At night, villagers claim it keeps the wolves away. Others say it keeps the dead in their graves. Whatever the truth is, every morning someone leaves a small offering, a coin, a flower, a handful of grain, not for worship, but for courtesy, as if you're thanking a guard you'd rather not meet at his post. The eyes that should not be met. There are statues you admire. There are statues you ignore. And then there are statues you avoid. Across cultures, certain figures were carved with deliberate intensity. Eyes too wide, posture too rigid, expressions too alert. The kind of statues that feel like they notice you. In old Anatolia, travelers spoke of stone guardians with inlaid obsidian eyes. They said staring into them would bring dreams so vivid the sleeper would wake exhausted, as if they'd spent the night running. In remote Celtic settlements, boundary stones were carved with exaggerated faces, enormous mouths, sharp teeth, not to scare invaders, but to scare away the spirits that were believed to drift across the moors at dusk. And in medieval Europe, there were roadside statues of silent saints with hollowed-out eyes, the paint long faded. Pilgrims passed them quickly, whispering prayers without looking up. Do not meet their gaze, they said. Some things look back. The statue that moved only once. Every region has one story. The statue that turned its head, or stepped off its pedestal, or was found a few inches to the left after a storm. This is the way forgotten guardians gather power in the imagination. Take the stone sentinel of Bracciaforte, a squat, heavy figure placed beside an old bridge. Records say villagers were terrified of crossing without touching its foot for luck. One winter, after a night of wind so strong it bent the iron weather vanes, the statue was found facing the opposite direction. Some blamed the weather, others blamed vandals, but a few, the quiet old ones, simply said, "It turned because something was coming." Superstition? Maybe. But the bridge never collapsed, the river never flooded the village, and the statue never moved again. It only needed to look once. The guardians that were fed. Not all statues were feared. Some were respected, like temperamental house guests you didn't want to upset. In remote mountain communities, stone figures were fed small bits of food, wine, cheese, bread. People believed these guardians absorbed the offering, not as nourishment, but as acknowledgement. To ignore them was riskier. One neglected statue in a Pyrenean village was said to bring strange weather, sudden fogs, unseasonal frost, winds that rattled shutters for hours. People didn't fear the statue itself. They feared what the world might become if it felt lonely. So every festival, every harvest, even every funeral, villagers placed a plate near its feet. "Let it know we remember," they said. "Let it stay gentle." Where the forgotten stand tonight. Some of these guardians still exist, half buried in moss, standing beside roads that are no longer roads, watching ruins that no longer belong to anyone. You may have passed them without knowing. A worn face in a field, a carved figure at the end of an old stone wall, a strange pillar beside an overgrown path. Once they were feared. Once they were spoken to. Once people crossed themselves before walking past. Now they wait, quietly. Stone remembers, even when people forget. Some statues were guardians, but others were sleepers, or so people believed. Carved figures placed in temples, shrines, necropolis, not to protect, not to warn, but to rest. Statues that looked peaceful, serene, almost human in their stillness. Too human. People walked quietly near them. Children were hushed. Doors were closed gently, not because the stone could wake, but because the stories said it might. Tonight we wander into that second world, the world of statues that slept, not feared for what they did, but for what they might do if disturbed. The sleeper beneath the monastery. High in the Carpathians, there was a monastery built against the cliffside, its corridors echoing with winter wind. Hidden behind a wooden grate, in a quiet alcove lit by just a single candle, stood a statue of a man lying on a stone slab, hands folded, eyes closed. A gentle, almost relieved expression. The monks called him the Resting Pilgrim. Visitors thought it was a tomb effigy, but the monks insisted he is sleeping, not buried. Every night, before locking the doors, a single monk would place a wool blanket over the statue's stone chest, a ritual performed for centuries. One winter, a young monk asked why. The elder simply replied, "So he stays asleep." No one explained what might happen if he didn't. The woman who listened in the dark. In a coastal settlement long abandoned, archaeologists found a peculiar statue. A woman seated in a simple chair, head slightly turned, as if listening. Her stone hair fell across one shoulder. Her hands were placed gently on her lap, relaxed. The locals who once lived there called her the Lady Who Hears. People refused to speak loudly near her. They whispered greetings when they passed. Some even apologized before sweeping the floor near her feet. Not because they feared anger, but because they feared attention. Stories claimed the statue listened, really listened, that she held conversations in dreams, that she remembered voices, and once, only once, someone said they heard a faint exhale, as if she were sighing. The house was abandoned the next morning. The statue remained, still listening. The guardian with the broken chain. In a desert shrine, almost swallowed by drifting sand, there stood a single figure. Tall, muscular, carved with exquisite detail, but with one odd feature: a chain carved around its ankle. Broken. People believed statues of guardians were chained to keep spirits from wandering. But this one had already slipped free, at least in the storyteller's imagination. Tribes passing through the region avoided the shrine entirely. Camel drivers steered wide around it, even if it meant hours added to their journey. "Do not wake the unbound one," they said. "He is only resting between steps." Night travelers claimed the sand near the statue shifted in strange patterns, as if something stirred around its feet, as if the unseen was stretching its limbs. The statue never moved, but the sand did. The sleeping child of the northern forest. Deep in the pines, where the snow falls quietly and the wind carries the scent of ice, there was a statue of a child curled in sleep beneath an ancient tree. The sculpture was small, barely the size of a real child, its face serene, its hands tucked beneath its cheek. Hunters left food beside it in winter, not out of fear, but out of a strange tenderness. The forest sleeps around him, they said, and as long as he is resting, the world is safe. One spring, a traveler removed the small pine branch blanket someone had laid over the statue during the winter storms. The locals replaced it hours later. "Never leave him exposed," they said. "Never let the cold touch him directly." It wasn't about the child waking. It was about the forest waking with him. The chamber of breathless echoes. Somewhere beneath an old fortress, its exact location lost, its stones scattered across centuries, there was once a room built entirely of polished basalt. Smooth walls, smooth floor, a smooth pedestal in the center. On that pedestal, a statue of a robed figure rested in a kneeling pose, head bowed, hands folded like someone deep in prayer. Visitors claimed that if you held your breath, you could hear the faint sound of someone else's breathing, slow, measured, stone deep. The keepers refused to enter at night. "It prays in the dark," they whispered, "and we must not interrupt." Even now, no one knows if the sound came from strange acoustics or from something else that shared the silence. The ones no one was allowed to carve. In some regions, people believed so deeply in sleeping statues that carving a figure in a resting pose was forbidden. Only guardians could be made, only watchers, only those meant to stand awake. A sleeping statue, they said, might contain a resting presence, a spirit, a breath that needed stillness, a dream that must not be disturbed. And so, forbidden statues became rare, and rare statues became feared, and feared statues became legends. The Sentinel of the Orchard Road. On a winding path leading to a town famous for its orchards stood a statue of a man with an outstretched arm pointing forward. Nothing unusual there, but the villagers insisted he didn't always point the same direction. Fruit pickers reported that sometimes his arm angled slightly left or slightly right, as if he adjusted it depending on who passed. Always subtle, always explainable, but never fully ignored. Travelers walking alone said they felt watched, not menacingly, but attentively, like someone checking to make sure they were meant to be there. Parents told children, "If the sentinel points at you, just nod and keep walking. It means he's seen you." Nobody questioned what he was checking for, or who asked him to watch.
The twin faces of the shrine. In a forest so dense, sunlight looked like filtered smoke, there was a small stone shrine with a statue carved in the center. It had two faces, one looking forward, one looking backward. But here was the strange thing. The villagers said the faces didn't look in opposite directions. They looked at you, no matter where you stood. If you approached from the front, the forward face watched you. If you circled behind, the rear face locked its gaze on yours. If you walked sideways, both seemed to subtly shift to keep you in sight. There was no magic, they assured, no curse, no tale of enchantment, just stone that behaved like it was paying attention. And the deeper mystery? People left offerings, not out of devotion, but out of politeness, because it's rude to ignore someone who is watching.
The nameless girl in the fortress courtyard. Inside the ruins of an old fortress, accessible only by a crumbling arch and a narrow stair, there stood a statue of a young girl. Bare feet, simple dress, hands clasped as if holding a secret. No inscription, no marker, no indication she ever existed beyond this carved image. Yet every local insisted on the same story. She remembers things. Not events, not names, but moods. Visitors who entered the courtyard while angry claimed the air felt tight, as if disapproving. Those who arrived exhausted felt strangely comforted, as if someone quietly acknowledged their weariness. Couples who quarreled said the statue made them feel watched until they resolved it. The mayor of a nearby village once said, "She looks like a child, but the expression she gives you, that's not how children look at people." No one lingered there after dusk. The Watcher in the River Cavern.
Along a river that carved its way through limestone cliffs, there was a cavern accessible only by rowing during low tide. Inside, on a natural stone ledge, sat a statue of a cloaked figure with no visible face beneath the hood. Fishermen avoided it, not out of superstition, but out of instinct. They said that even though the hood was empty, you could feel eyes within it, not staring, but waiting. When oars dipped into the water, the sound echoed strangely, as if someone else were rowing in rhythm. Some fishermen claimed they heard a second set of footsteps behind their own, soft, measured, stone-like. No one looked directly at the statue for long. Something about it made the gaze slide away, as if the mind insisted on self-protection. The stone figure never moved, of course, but people swore it leaned forward ever so slightly if someone lingered too long in the cave. Not threatening, just observant. Too observant. The Elder with the Unblinking Eyes. In a mountain village, there was a statue called simply the Elder, a seated man carved with wrinkled detail, wearing a robe that flowed to the stone dais below. His chin rested on his hand, and his eyes were carved open, wide open. Carved eyes usually seem lifeless. Not these. People said the Elder's eyes followed arguments, not people. When neighbors quarreled in the square beside him, the statue seemed to angle, not physically, but perceptually, toward whoever was speaking. Some said you could tell a conversation was over when the Elder's gaze softened, as though satisfied. Others claimed that liars felt uneasy under his stare, as if stone could sense dishonesty the way dogs smell fear. One night, during a particularly heated dispute, the villagers insisted the air went completely still, and the Elder listened so intently that both quarreling men stopped mid-sentence and apologized. No magic, just stone. Stone that seemed to understand. The pet that never lived. In a merchant's home in a busy trade city, there was a small statue of a cat carved from black polished basalt, smooth, silent, perfectly still. The merchant claimed it was just a decorative object brought from a faraway port, but his children insisted the statue followed them with its eyes. Guests swore the statue's head was angled differently each time they visited, subtly, barely noticeably, but undeniably changed. Merchants passing through the home after long journeys sometimes felt a strange comfort in the statue's presence, as if it was quietly keeping count of who arrived safely. When the eldest daughter of the family fell ill, the statue was found positioned slightly closer to her bedside table, though no one had moved it. Years later, after the family moved away, the new owners kept it in the same place, because it feels wrong, they said, to make it watch a different room. The Murmuring Soldier. On an old battlefield marked Covered with moss and shattered foundations, a statue stood at attention. A soldier with his spear grounded, gaze forward. People claimed that when the wind was right, you could hear a faint murmur coming from beneath the helm. Not words, not cries, just a low rhythmic whisper that sounded eerily like someone reviewing a drill command from memory. A soldier practicing in his sleep or in his stone. Travelers refused to rest near it at night, not out of fear of danger, but out of respect. It's rude to disturb someone still on duty, they said, even centuries after the war ended. The statue buried standing up. There is a village tucked between low hills and quiet fields where a statue stands underground, not lying down, not shattered, not hidden in a box. It stands upright, exactly as it once did in the town square, only now the earth has swallowed it to the neck. Nobody knows when it happened. There was no earthquake, no recorded flood, no sudden collapse of land. Just one morning, people woke to find the statue buried waist deep. By the next year, only its shoulders showed. A few years later, just the head, peeking out of the earth like a silent observer. The guardian left behind. The statue was once a guardian, its face stern, its posture rigid, its gaze fixed toward the sunrise. It wasn't beautiful. It wasn't friendly. Even when it stood in the open, children walked past it quickly, and older villagers avoided meeting its gaze. But once the earth began to swallow it, the fear changed. People no longer feared its presence. They feared its persistence. Why didn't it fall as the land shifted? Why did it sink perfectly vertical, as if lowering itself? Who or what decides the resting place of stone? No one had answers, and the more they wondered, the less they wanted to look at it. The eyes that watched the soil rise. The creepiest part, according to quiet whispers passed around at dusk, was that the statue's eyes seemed to follow the level of the earth. As the soil rose around it, its expression sharpened. The carved brows seemed deeper, the mouth grew tighter. The eyes, though made of solid stone, felt more focused, as though trying to understand the world closing in around it. Children dared each other to sit beside it at dusk. Most didn't last a full minute. "It's listening," they would say. "It's waiting." Adults dismissed it, but even they walked the long way around the field, avoiding the rise in the earth where the guardian sat sinking. The village's quiet decision. Years passed. Grass grew over the hill that swallowed the statue. Only the top of the head remained visible, weathered, moss-covered, almost gentle. The elders decided
no digging, no unearthing, no restoring. Let it be, they said. And so the statue remained, sinking inch by inch, as if slowly bowing to the earth, or returning to something it once knew. Some say it's still sinking even now, not because the ground is shifting, but because the statue is choosing to go deeper. That idea, more than anything else, made people stop looking at it completely. A guardian's last sight. Today, if you stand on the hill during a very bright morning, you might see the faint outline of its crown, nothing more. An entire statue buried deliberately by time or by something else, left with only a final glimpse of the world. A guardian who may still be watching, may still be waiting, may still be sinking. But whatever it's doing, the villagers agree on one thing. It's better not to disturb something that buries itself. The statue that turned its back. In a quiet coastal town where the air always tasted faintly of salt and gulls cried in distant spirals overhead, there once stood a statue carved to face the sea. It had watched the horizon for centuries, boats leaving, boats returning, storms rolling in like dark, churning beasts. But one summer morning, the townspeople awoke to find the statue no longer facing the shore. Its back, once against the village, was now turned to the waves. No footprints, no drag marks, no signs of tampering. Just a silent figure rotated neatly on its stone pedestal. The guardian of the sea road. The statue was known by many names: the watchman, the salt sentinel, the one who waits for sailors. No one remembered who carved it, or when, or why, but they remembered the tradition. Every departing fisherman touched the statue's hand for luck. Every returning crew laid a shell at its feet. Superstitions, perhaps, but the ocean is a place where superstition feels like common sense. So when the statue shifted, the villagers' first reaction wasn't curiosity, it was dread. Something had made the guardian turn away. The night before it moved. People tried to recall any sign, any hint that something was wrong the night before. The waves had been calm, the moon was low and pearly, hanging over the water like a lantern made of bone. Dogs had barked, some said. Others heard a deep humming vibration, too soft to trace, too strange to describe. A few old sailors claimed the tide rose without the moon's permission, just a few inches, just enough to cover the first step of the pier. Then morning arrived, and the guardian had turned. The most unsettling idea came from an elder fisherman. He stared at the statue for a long time, his weathered hand resting on the railing of the pier, knuckles pale. Finally, he said, very quietly, "It's not ignoring the sea, it's avoiding it." The villagers didn't want to understand what that meant. A protector turning its back on something implied danger. But when protectors hide, people fear what they're hiding from. The statue's new posture, its shoulders stiff, its head angled slightly downward, as if refusing to witness something, made the village feel smaller, more fragile, and the sea somehow felt larger than before. From then on, strange things happened. Fishermen reported patches of still water, circles where the waves refused to move, as if something enormous rested just beneath the surface. Nets came back with neat, precise holes in them, as if cut by a patient hand. At night, villagers saw a shape on the water. Not a boat, not an animal, not a man, but a slow-moving silhouette that vanished the moment they blinked. And through all of it, the statue stood with its back turned, as if pretending none of it existed. Eventually, people began touching the statue's hand only when leaving town permanently. Not for luck, for farewell. Some whispered to it, some apologized, some asked it what it had seen. But the guardian never moved again. Not forward, not backward, not even a tilt of the head. It simply stood with its back to the sea and its face toward the town, as if shielding the people from a horizon they no longer wished to understand. And slowly, the villagers learned, when a guardian refuses to look at something, maybe we shouldn't look either. For centuries, statues have been made to watch, to warn, to stand vigil. But in a far inland village, surrounded by pines so tall they hid the sky, there stood a statue carved not to see, but to listen. Its head bowed slightly, one hand cupped behind its ear, its posture forever poised as if catching a whisper carried by the wind. Children joked that it listened to gossip. Adults avoided walking past it at night, and travelers passing through the forest trail would always pause involuntarily, as if the statue was listening specifically to them. The forest around the village was known for one strange thing. It was never completely silent, not even in winter, not even in snowstorms. There was always a soft murmur,
like someone speaking from very far away, just below the threshold of human comprehension. Some said it was the wind, some said it was the trees, but others believed the murmurs were messages, warnings, memories, echoes of things long forgotten, telling their stories to the only being patient enough to hear them, the statue. When the statues began to move, it started subtly. The guardian's head tilted a fraction deeper to the forest, barely noticeable, barely measurable. People dismissed it. Stone shifts, they said. Soil settles. But weeks later, the statue leaned even more, its body arching, its cupped hand raised slightly higher, as if the forest had whispered something urgent, and it strained to catch every syllable. Then one morning, it changed direction entirely. Instead of listening to the pines, the statue turned its ear toward the village. No one slept that night, because for the first time in living memory, the murmurs in the forest went silent. A silence so complete it felt unnatural, like breath held too long. Then, slowly, a new sound drifted through the trees, a whisper shaped like a warning. No words were clear, no phrase interpretable, just a sense, a tone, a cold feeling of something coming. That was the night the statue moved again, pivoting its entire body toward the village, its cupped hand hovering protectively between the houses, as if shielding the people from a voice they were never meant to hear.
Statues in this region were built for many reasons: commemoration, decoration, tradition. But this one had a purpose. Legends said it was carved by a traveler who lived only one winter in the village, a strange man who wandered alone, listening to the forest every night, as if decoding a language older than human memory. Before leaving, he carved the statue, set it in the square, and whispered something into its stone ear. The villagers never knew what he said, but they knew this: a guardian only moves when its duty is being tested. And now, with its entire posture tilted between the people and the woods, it stood like a barrier, soft, silent, but unyielding. As nights grew colder, villagers noticed something else. The statue seemed heavier, not physically, but emotionally, like carrying a burden no one else could bear. One winter dawn, after a night of unsettling winds, the villagers found the statue had made one last shift. Its hand was no longer cupped to its ear. It was stretched outward, palm open, as if saying, "Do not listen," or perhaps, "I will listen so you do not have to." And with that gesture, the forest's whisper faded to a distant sigh. The statue
never moved again. But everyone knew what it had heard that final night was something humans were not meant to understand.
The night the guardians went quiet. Statues are meant to stand still, to hold one shape, one story, one silence. But the guardians you've met in these chapters, the ones people feared to look at, the ones who turned their heads, shifted their weight, leaned closer, or listened to whispers meant for no living ear, they have never been just statues. They were witnesses. They were warnings. They were the memory keepers of things history never bothered to write down.
A headless guardian on a cliff, a veiled statue that changed its expression, a stone sentinel whose shadow moved before it did. A guardian that listened to the forest more intimately than any human ever could. Different places, different centuries, different fears, but each one carried the same quiet truth. They were made for the moments humans could not face alone. The nights when storms came, the seasons when the world felt wrong, the whispering places where no one dared to ask, "What is watching us?" or "What is listening?" Statues do not breathe, but humans have always needed something that stands firm when we are afraid.
The old stories say there came a night when every guardian, from the cliffside to the forest hollow, grew still at the exact same moment. A moment like a held breath in the dark. Wind paused, torches flickered, dogs refused to bark. Every home, every valley, every lonely shrine fell into a silence so deep that even the bravest people felt it settling over them like a blanket of cold ash. And then, one by one, the statues froze in their final postures. A hand raised, a head bowed, a body leaning towards something unseen, never to move again, not even a fraction, not even when storms shook the earth or seasons bent the world out of shape, as if whatever they had been guarding against had finally passed, or finally arrived. After that night, villages tried to record what happened. Chroniclers wrote half pages before deciding they must be mistaken. Travelers described something strange, then crossed it out. Families lit candles, not sure whether they were thanking the guardians or apologizing to them, because statues don't move. And yet, somehow, everyone felt the absence of something that had been quietly protecting them all along. And so, as centuries passed, people stopped fearing these statues. They began to understand fear and protection can look very similar in the dark. Sometimes the thing you avoid looking at is the thing that stood between you and the dangers you never saw. Today, their stone bodies stand cracked, weathered,
covered in moss, half forgotten among roots, ruins, and corners of old towns where tourists rarely wander. But if you stand near one at dusk, just as the sky slips from blue to violet, and just as the world takes its quiet inhale, you may feel it, that gentle pressure in the air, like the last echo of a warning or a blessing or a promise. You were never alone. And so the strange little journey ends, not in fear, but in stillness. The forgotten guardians remain where they always were, on cliffs, in forests, behind old gates, at crossroads older than memory, no longer feared, no longer moving, no longer watching for danger, just resting, like you are meant to do now. So breathe slowly, let the night settle, and let the guardians keep one last silent vigil as you drift into sleep.